Online Radio. I am your host, Black Box Ned. And on Tuesdays, I've been talking to you guys about the story of JonBenet Ramsey, perhaps the most famous unsolved murder mystery in American history. And some of you may be noticing that the format is a little bit different, and I also apologize that the live stream came out a little bit late. You see, this channel has been experiencing some technical difficulties for unknown reasons, and also, I don't talk so good. So that's why I'm doing another live stream on the phone, although I did do one earlier this year on the phone in this format, and everybody said they could hear me okay. So if anybody joins in the chat, or if anybody's listening to this in a future date, just let me know how everything sounds. But, of course, it's Tuesday, so on Tuesdays, we can say hello to Snoopy here. And hello, how is everybody doing? Welcome to this segment, and I'm also going to be talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case because this is going to be the final installment in the series that I've been doing on JonBenet. I did several episodes in a series called The Imperfect Murder, and I also did some that were talking about some other subjects, responding to other sources, different articles. And Chickadee is here. Hey, Chickadee, how you doing? Classic Chevy Cat is here. Says, sounds good. That's what I want to hear. But I also have the announcement that next week, Black Box Online Radio will return to the format of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. With me, Black Box Ned, coming to you every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where you can chill with Snoopy and a host of other characters. But in this episode, I wanted to talk about the suspect, John Mark Karr, because he is perhaps the most famous suspect in the JonBenet Ramsey case outside of the Ramsey family. But the problem is, everybody seems to think that John Mark Karr is nothing more than some type of wacky liar, and it's really a bizarre situation. John Mark Karr was an individual who got his degree in early childhood education. I mean, not sure the specifics, but he focused on early childhood education, specifically in the grades from K to 3. And he worked in the United States for a while, but he got in trouble, let's just say, looking at pictures of children, being very careful with my language. And he ultimately ended up teaching abroad in different countries and ended up in Thailand. After the murder of JonBenet, John Mark Karr developed this type of obsession where he began following all of the news coverage and all of the developments and learning everything about the Ramsey case. So then he started corresponding with an individual who was a professor of journalism in Colorado, as well as a producer for documentaries. And he was using the name Daxis, D-A-X-I-S, which was a pet name that JonBenet actually had for her grandmother that wasn't widely discussed or widely known about at the time. So this led people to become very suspicious about this individual, and the professor/producer decided to tip off the authorities. And by John Mark Karr's own admission, he became somewhat suspicious of the conversations, expecting that there was going to be some type of knock on his door one day when he was living in Thailand abroad as a teacher. Ultimately, John Mark Karr was arrested for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, extradited back to the United States of America. And I remember that the Court TV anchor, Vinnie Politan, said that that was the biggest moment in the history of Court TV. Now, he said that, and of course you might think about some of the other things. Court TV is still making new episodes about the O.J. Simpson case. You would think that they would still want to be writing off that story for some reason, but he said the arrest of John Mark Karr and the extradition back to the United States was the biggest story for Court TV. Now, John Mark Karr is somebody who is very creepy. He's been in trouble with the law, doing bad things to children, not only CP, looking at pictures, but when he was 19 years old, reportedly he married a 13-year-old in the state of Alabama, which was legal at the time with parental consent, but that still has to make you kind of wonder, in the 20th and 21st century, that just doesn't sound like something that would be appropriate anymore. Take My Liz says, this MF stole my catalytic converter last week, I think. Do you mean me? Or do you mean John Mark Karr? I'm not quite sure who stole your catalytic converter. I'm sorry that that happened to you, but hey, wishing you the best. Anyway, back to the story. So John Mark Karr is under public focus and scrutiny. Everybody is looking at him for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. But what happens? They test his DNA against the DNA that is found on JonBenet, and it's reportedly not a match. So therefore he is let go. But what about all these other weird things that he's been doing? And then he's like, dealing with CP, he's dealing with abusing children, and there were real allegations against him. And he wasn't just some guy who wanted to go abroad to learn about the world. He wasn't just some guy who wanted to go abroad to teach in other countries because he thought it was fun. Instead, he wanted to do this to escape these charges in the United States. But they investigated him for that, and apparently critical evidence was lost in regards to these charges of CP and child abuse and all of that. So they were thrown out, and John Mark Karr is a free citizen. He lived in the state of Georgia for a while, as well as having a house in the state of Alabama. But ultimately, he would leave the country once again and settle in Europe. Take My Liz says, I feel like you smell like exotic animals. You feel like I smell like exotic animals? How do you feel that? How do you feel my smell over the phone? I don't get you, Take My Liz. Do you have a lizard? No, I bet you have a squirrel or some other weird-ass animal. Well, I don't see how this is relevant to the JonBenet Ramsey case, but I try to respond to most questions. Do I have a lizard? No. But I do love lizards. I love all types of animals. I really do, even jellyfish and newts. Oh, I feel like you sell exotic animals. See, Scott, I don't read so good. No, I don't sell exotic animals either. I thought you said smell. That would have been a little bit more of kind of like an easier inference. Back to the story, back to the true crime. I don't know what Take My Liz is talking about. All right, so did John Mark Karr do this? And furthermore, why would he confess to a crime that he didn't commit? Why would he have these conversations with somebody because he wants to put this stuff out there? Like, what on earth is going on? There's an article about John Mark Karr's confession in the Christian Science Monitor that talks about this. And everybody listening up, gonna stay focused here. No more smelling like lizards. Challenge questions from the Christian Science Monitor. Why would somebody confess to a crime that they did not commit? Why would somebody even have conversations about that on the internet or in phone calls or sending them pieces of writing and talk about a crime that they did not commit but act like they were a murderer? 3 reasons have been proposed by this article that I was reading earlier today. Number 1, they wanted to cover for somebody. Like, they wanted to go to jail so somebody else wouldn't go to jail. They wanted to take the fall so somebody else wouldn't. Well, what do you think about that? Is that relevant to John Mark Karr? I don't see how. And if it is, he did a pretty terrible job because he was let out of prison. I don't think that's relevant at all. Issue number 2, attention and recognition. That's what they said. Does John Mark Karr's story sound like somebody who wanted attention and recognition? I don't really think that's the heart of the issue either. And this is one that was not mentioned in the article, but this is what I think is the most important aspect of the case. And that is that John Mark Karr possibly did this because of a bizarre and demented form of entertainment. Because when they look at him, it appears that he had an obsession with JonBenet Ramsey. He followed the case extremely closely. And most importantly, he wanted to insert himself into the case and act like he was one of the participants. He's watching the news coverage. He's watching these stories on television. He's watching people being interviewed. He's hearing the stories from detectives. He's reading about this in the papers. And he wants to insert himself into the story. Is that the same as attention and recognition? No, I don't think so. On Black Box Online Radio, you often hear me using the term fueling one's own excitement. And I say that about serial killers. It relates to the dopamine surges and rewards in the brain. But, of course, we're not talking about serial killers right now. This is when somebody is trying to make up certain stories because they think it's fun. Because it's fun for them, but in a twisted and demented way. And this is also a time when I'm going to be very real with you. So I'm going to take a sip of Snoopy's coffee. And I'm just going to lay it out. That thought has definitely crossed my mind, like, isn't an intrusive thought. As somebody who runs a true crime channel, yeah, that's come to my mind once or twice. Oh, what if I were to say something that's really wild and wacky that I don't genuinely believe because it would make a reaction? But I didn't do it. No, absolutely not. And ultimately, most of us have a conscience. And certainly, I was never thinking of doing something that was on par with confessing to a murder. So this guy's a little bit demented. He's a little bit inappropriate, very inappropriate, actually, if these allegations dealing with child abuse are true. And also, he's trying to do this because he is just has this desire to become one of the people that's talked about on the television, and he succeeded. Although it's not in the way that he wanted. It seems like he wanted to create this persona called Daxus that is going to be corresponding and setting up false leads and false information. You can see them in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio. So take my Liz, for example. This person is saying a lot of weird things in the chat. I don't know if you're drunk, take my Liz, or maybe you're just trying to do things because you want it to be mentioned on someone else's live stream. Whatever you're doing, I don't know, but never listen to my channel again. You're not welcome here. But as far as the actions of John Mark Karr, it seems like he didn't want to get caught. He wanted to do this anonymously. It's just they were able to trace things back to him. And ultimately, he did an interview with Greta Van Susteren, who was on Fox News at the time, and I've not been the biggest fan of her. It has nothing to do with the Fox News angle. I just haven't been the biggest fan of her as a broadcaster and as a TV host. But she's talking to John Mark Karr, and at first she started it out as a very slow and softball interview, where she's saying all these things, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, why are you talking friendly to this guy? Most likely he's a serial child predator. Why would you say that type of stuff to someone who is trying to do all these terrible things and is now a free person who can just continue to get away with it? But ultimately, she was able to get some information out of him, or more importantly, what he did not say. She asked him a direct question, and that was, have you ever been in the Ramsey household? Because with JonBenet Ramsey, she is abducted, murdered, she is strangled with a garrote, she is placed in the basement of her house in the wine cellar. At some point, she's hit in the head with a blunt object. She has duct tape over her mouth. Her hands are bound, and who knows who did it. But I call this an abduction because an abduction doesn't necessarily mean transporting the victim to a different place based on the legal definition of the abduction. But as far as, just one second, I really didn't mean to disrupt the flow of the channel. It's just that Take My Liz person was saying way too many garbage things, and I just had to get that individual out of here. I guess a verbal warning was not enough. But JonBenet was found dead in the wine cellar, and a 2.5-page ransom note was left behind. Then there is this very big question of who would do that, why would they do that, how long was somebody in the household? John Mark Karr was directly asked about this, and the response was he just refused to answer. He's just not answering the question. And he's saying stuff like, have you ever met Patsy Ramsey before, JonBenet's mother? He did not answer that question either. So why would somebody withhold that information? I'm reminded of some of the stories that I heard with David Berkowitz back when I did the Son of Sam episodes here on this channel. And when I was looking into that case, a lot of people have the opinion of David Berkowitz that he is just a sociopathic individual. He is just someone who is going to continuously lie, even when he doesn't have to. He is just going to keep spinning these ridiculous narratives when there's no real benefit to him. And that's what I think John Mark Karr is doing. Now, the only reason why I think this still warrants an episode is John Mark Karr was exonerated because of DNA evidence, specifically the DNA evidence that was found on JonBenet's underwear. There's at least 3 strong sections of DNA evidence that are found on the waistband of the underwear, on the leggings or long johns that she was wearing, and underneath her fingernails. And now you're kind of be wondering, are those all the same person? Well, I was listening to Susanna Ryan on Core TV. Susanna Ryan is with Pure Gold Forensics. She was also a regular panelist on the Citizen Detective podcast. She's just the go-to person with DNA. And what she said is that there's enough information, forensically speaking, to say that the DNA that was found on JonBenet's underwear and on her leggings or long johns is from the same person. All right, that's very strong. That makes it sound like the DNA is a little bit more credible than people had originally thought. All right, so I'll definitely hear somebody out like that, someone who is a DNA expert. Thanks, Snoop. So that's one thing. But then this also begs the question of, was John Mark Karr in the house? Because that's what it seems like he's mostly saying. His strongest claim that he seems to reiterate over and over again is that he was in the house. But he did make confessions to being with JonBenet when she was murdered, and also claiming that he strangled her. And I believe this was in the Yahoo News article that I was reading, where he said that he pushed the garrote around her and he strangled her, but he didn't actually want to kill her. That was an accident. And then once he realized that he was in trouble, he panicked, so he struck her in the head with a blunt object. And we have Mysteries of Mr. Belgique here. Hey, Jerome. And Richard Delaney is here. Hey, how are you guys doing? Welcome to this Tuesday episode, True Crime on the Phone once again. And then those are two very odd things because I'm really reminded of the story of the confession of Gary Oliva. Gary Oliva is the suspect that I was talking about last week, and he also claims that he murdered JonBenet Ramsey, another confession, but the same reason. He said that he did it as an accident. Whoa, I didn't want it to go that far. It was an accident and it got out of control and I let her slip away. Scott Bobbitt says, what is a garrote? A garrote is when you take a rope or a cord and then you tie it around an object, and then you use it to strengthen the force of the rope or cord when you are strangling somebody. Specifically with the garrote that was used in the JonBenet Ramsey case, someone had broken a paintbrush that was found in the house, and they took the garrote and they made some rather complicated lashings around it. Like they went around a piece of wood multiple times, this broken piece of a paintbrush. And then when you pull it around the neck, there's going to be a lot of extra force that is used. And if you want to see a movie where they do this in a different context, it's called Ripley's Game. It's the second movie in the Talented Mr. Ripley series where they just give these explanations on how a garrote can be used. And at one point, one character even says, it's not like a garrote comes with a manual, but those are just some explanations. And Christopher Valdez is here. Hey, Christopher. Captain Jenks is here. Hey, how are you guys doing? You get a cheers from Snoopy. All right, though, I just thought it was very odd that these confessions were happening in a very similar way, and I don't necessarily think that John Mark Karr would have been aware of the confessions of Gary Oliva. And one of you guys left this in the comment section last week on the channel. I think it was Dave Smith. Just giving a shout out to you, Dave, if that was you, when he said that it sounds like Gary Oliva could be a credible suspect, but not quite sure. And Christopher Valdez says, a garrote is also used in the movie Blowout. Oh, I haven't seen Blowout yet. I was actually making a movie list earlier of movies I need to watch. Perfect timing, Christopher. Amazing. But when Gary Oliva compared to John Mark Karr, there's some questionable things about the DNA because John Mark Karr's DNA was tested against this sample, and it appears that he was not the perpetrator. With Gary Oliva, from my readings on him, it appeared that they expect that his DNA would have been tested, but we aren't completely sure. He is a sex offender who went to prison, so they have JonBenet's killer's DNA, or the person who handled her underwear, leggings, and under the fingernails. And if he were convicted of these crimes, Gary Oliva, convicted of other crimes, his DNA should have been put into the CODIS system. So it's kind of just presented to us in the media that he should have been exonerated because of DNA, but we're not completely sure. Gary Oliva also made confessions to murdering JonBenet, saying that he had an obsession with her, he was stalking her, he had over 300 images of her on his computer, even her autopsy photos, he wrote a poem about her. And furthermore, one of the biggest pieces of evidence is he got on the phone on the night of December 27th of 1996, and he called somebody and he said, I did something bad. I did something bad to a little girl. And that is something that just really creates a lot of room for doubt and suspicion. And he also claimed that he was in Boulder, Colorado at the time. So these are all things that make him look like such a guilty perpetrator, sex offender, admitting that he did it, explaining how he did it, admitting that he was in Boulder, Colorado in the time when he should have been in Oregon. And also this just a mass of photos related to JonBenet. So I'm seeing all of these things, and I'm just like, well, isn't this just the guy? DNA apparently does not say yes, or the very least. Then I just have to respond to this one thing in the chat here, excuse me. Kid Freshy was asking Captain Jenks, are you the real Captain Jenks? I said the exact same thing when I saw that because, no, this is not the real Captain Jenks here, Tom Cipriano, but Captain Jenks, the real one, is very active on social media and he posts a lot of stuff. So that's what I was wondering. Like, I mean, it's possible that the real Captain Jenks could be in the chat. One day, David Icke showed up here. And I'm like, are you the real David Icke? He's like, no. I'm like, I'm just trying. I'm just trying. And Chickadee says, I never understood why using a rod on a small child. It might be useful on a grown man, but using on a child sounds like a fetish sort of thing. Absolutely, Chickadee. I mean, I could totally understand that. I also think, though, that the garrote was fashioned while the perpetrator was waiting. And this is the stuff that a lot of people don't want to hear about. These are the things that get me into trouble with this series. And that is that I think that an intruder did it. I think that this person was a predator. I think that this person was somebody who was tracking JonBenet and the family for a while, monitoring their movements. I think this person entered the house when they were at the Christmas party on December 25th of 1996, and they were hiding in a room in the house. I think they made the rod out of the paintbrush to pass the time. I think they wrote the ransom note to pass the time. I think they returned the items to the appropriate places because they didn't want anything to look out of place. We're talking about over a span of 2 to 3 hours, maybe more, that this person is waiting in the house for JonBenet to return. And that's what I think happened. I don't think it was Burke. I don't think it was Patsy. And I don't think it was John. But one thing that this series has shown me is that if the DNA evidence is not credible, like some people are saying, well, maybe it was Gary Oliva's DNA and it's just not credible. Maybe it was John Mark Karr's DNA and it just wasn't credible. If the DNA is not credible, then I would totally put the focus back on the Ramseys, because that is the biggest reason why I put them lower on the list. And I'll just leave it at that. There are other reasons, some profiling things. Oh, Captain Jenks. I'm the Captain Jenks from Howard Stern. I was like, you told me very clearly that you are not. And now he says you are not. Now he says that he is not. So I thank you for the clarity, Captain Jenks. Kid Freshie says, the case will never be solved until people are prepared to imagine the worst. Now, Kid Freshie, I've looked at a lot of your comments, and you think that it was someone in the Ramsey household, correct? Would you want to elaborate on that for this one? This is going to be the last JonBenet episode. That's one of the reasons why I'm going live. And then we're going to return to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning next week. If you would like to put that in the comments section or the live chat here, I would love to read it. But one additional note about John Mark Karr as a suspect. During these reported confessions that he is making and sending to the producer professor in Colorado, he was talking about how there was sexual assault and that Seaman was left behind, and that's how he assaulted JonBenet. But that does not seem to be the case. Now, why would he say that? Where would he get some type of idea that Seaman DNA was left behind? I told you very clearly, the most widely accepted narrative is that the DNA that was taken for JonBenet was on her underwear, leggings, and her fingernails. Where would you hear something like that? How about in the book, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, which I've been talking about, which is one of the reasons why I called the series The Imperfect Murder on Black Box Online Radio. And that is because Perfect Murder, Perfect Town talks about how there was semen DNA left behind. My copy was purchased in 1998 or something, very early. It was right after the time the miniseries Perfect Murder, Perfect Town came out on CBS. I just want to check this real fast. 1998. So that appears to be a detail that perhaps Lawrence Schiller was unaware of at the time. And Chickadee says, the ransom note mentioned the exact amount of John Ramsey's bonus. Inside information? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And according to Lawrence Schiller, whom I was just mentioning, John Ramsey said that from the very beginning, that he thought this was an inside job because he thought it was somebody who had intense familiarity with the house, and that is one of the reasons why JonBenet was placed in the wine cellar, because he said he didn't talk about the wine cellar, nor did Patsy. It shouldn't have been a place that people were even aware of. Granted, if you had 2 to 3 hours to just walk around the house and just kind of like sit in the basement, you would be aware of the wine cellar. But he was like, this was an inside job, partnered with the fact that there's the $118,000 bonus, which, as I understand, was actually from 1995, which he would have received in early 1996. But somebody would have known that. So then this brings me to the next point. And that is that if this is some type of inside job, then that would most likely not be John Mark Karr or Gary Oliva. I don't know how he would have had that information, because one of the problems with John Mark Karr as a suspect is they were asking this question. And it's actually asked by John Ramsey, and I think this was what was this? The news article that I was reading this one in Business Insider. That was it. It's been a long time since I've used Business Insider as a source on this channel, and it was stating that John Mark Karr may have been a suspicious figure that was stalking the Ramseys in Michigan. And John Mark Karr openly denied that. He's already confessed to murdering JonBenet Ramsey. He just said, no, I wasn't stalking them in Michigan. I didn't know where they lived in Michigan. I wouldn't have known where to go in Michigan to find the Ramseys. If anything, he's probably telling the truth with that one, because just because you're familiar with their house in Boulder, that doesn't mean you're going to be familiar with all of their properties around the country or their places where they frequent, such as Michigan, as well as in Georgia. Although both John Mark Karr and the Ramseys have a connection to Georgia. Captain Jenks says the SA 8 months a block over from JonBenet went to school with her and was in pageants with her. Just the police lost the evidence in the bed sheets. Okay, so do you mean that there was another SA that happened a block over from JonBenet and then they lost the evidence? It's my understanding that within a 2-mile radius around JonBenet's house, there were 38 sex offenders. Even though Boulder, Colorado did not have a high percentage of murders, there was a very high percentage of sex offenders that were present. And that is just absolutely shocking. And Chickadee says the police were pretty incompetent. Now, I was just watching an interview with John Ramsey when he appeared on the Today Show, 80 years old, and he was talking about some of the incompetence that happened, that one of the detectives who worked on the case for so long was previously mostly focused on auto thefts before shifting to homicide. And what John Ramsey said, maybe everyone can agree on this, is that he was talking about how it's not that he didn't have the experience with homicides, it's that he refused help from people who did have the experience. Can I just ask everybody in the chat right now, this is something that I'm extremely curious about, because I've engaged in the comment section and on other channels, and then people don't agree with me on this. How much stock do you put in the DNA? The DNA that is found on JonBenet's body, that reportedly and allegedly belongs to somebody other than the Ramseys. How much weight do you put in that? Do you think that that is just unrelated? Do you think that JonBenet was perhaps just, handled by somebody at the Christmas party? I mean, that shouldn't have been the same clothes, but do you think that JonBenet was in contact with somebody else and there's some explanation? Okay, let's say something about how there's some type of DNA transfer some way, somehow, under the fingernails. That could happen very easily at the Christmas party. The underwear and leggings are a little bit more complicated because these would have been night clothes that she should definitely have not been wearing those leggings at the Christmas party. But just please put your response in the comment section down below. Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says 50-50 on the DNA. Captain Jenks says 100% on the DNA. Okay, Captain Jenks is so there's the theory that you're going with is that this is a sex offender who was a couple blocks away that was just targeting girls in the area. Is that the theory you're going with? And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, why don't ask for more money? $118,000 is nothing for the Ramseys. He was a millionaire. Okay. This is one of the biggest questions that has been asked. Why use that number? Why say that? And Lawrence Schiller's even talking about this in the book, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. John Ramsey could have assembled more than $118,000. It's most likely because the ransom note was a dud. You agree with that, right? You. Whomever you are, you think the ransom note was fake. It wasn't a real ransom. No one wanted that. Not even Snoopy. And the reason why is because JonBenet's body was found in the house. I think they were trying to make it look like a kidnapping, and it's all a ruse. They did not want to collect $118,000. Whether you think it was John, Patsy, or Burke, or whether you think it was an intruder or a predator, they were never intending to collect the money. That's why it says $118,000. It's just a made-up number that somebody was thinking about. And because they made it up, they made it look sloppy. So it's like, no matter whom your suspect is, it was just somebody who didn't actually want that. They're just writing this thing, which, as I said, I think they wrote this because they wanted to create a diversion. And people who think that it was the family are saying that they wrote this to make up some weird, twisted cover story because they just didn't know what to do. Classic Chevy Cat says, the panties are a huge flag in the case. DNA is vital if that's the case. And Chickadee says, it depends on when the DNA was done and how it was collected. Even after doing this series, multi-part discussion series on JonBenet Ramsey, I can't tell you everything about how the DNA was collected. But as I said, that quotation from Susanna Ryan when she said, at the very least, most likely it's the same person's DNA on her clothes. Now, she didn't say anything about the DNA on the fingernails. And Captain Jenks says, John Ramsey stopped working for over 4 years and had to give up a lot of homes and property, not the actions of a guilty person. Oh, yeah, they say that all the time, Captain Jenks, in the documentaries. I agree. And you know who also agrees? John Ramsey. They frequently say he lost his millions. I mean, if this is really just not the actions of somebody who is guilty, I agree with. Patrick Lemire says, I'm surprised that the killer hasn't been caught like Golden State Killer. So much data out there. Well, this is what Chickadee's talking about, Patrick, when Chickadee is saying that maybe the person who did this hasn't really had their DNA entered into the system. Maybe the DNA was collected improperly. Maybe the DNA was mishandled. Maybe the DNA evidence is not reliable. And if that's the case, we're going back to the drawing board. Because as we've seen from the story of John Mark Karr, confessions are nothing in this case. Is it John Mark Karr or Gary Oliva? Or were they working together? I don't see any evidence that they were going together, but I do maintain that the strongest points in John Mark Karr's story, the stuff that he remains the most consistent about, is that he was present when she died. Is this two sexual predators? I honestly don't think so. Another piece of evidence against that is John Mark Karr's family states that he was with them for the whole Christmas of 1996, and he just never left the house. They might actually be telling the truth about that. And just some other background info about John Mark Karr is that this is the story of his case. He was someone who decided to undergo gender transitioning, and he now goes by the name Alexis Reich. And he tried to start some type of movement involving unconventional lifestyles, and people are just like, this guy is an absolute creep. And as I was watching him during the Greta Van Susteren interview, which everybody can watch here on YouTube for free, he was acting like somebody who was first extremely threatening, but trying to be non-threatening. And he has a very blank look in his eyes during the interview the whole time, a very neutral tone of voice. But at the same time, he just comes across as extremely cold, very feminine, but also cold. Feminine, though, for a man. All of these things come together is that these might be the characteristics that would put children in a non-threatening state, but not adults. No, I think a lot of adults could see through that. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says the ransom note was a ruse. Chickadee says maybe someone was trying to implicate the Ramseys. Quite possible. Now, somebody responded to one of my most recent JonBenet episodes by saying it was the housekeeper. Now, as I understand, the housekeeper had a dispute with Patsy Ramsey over some money, which was in the thousands of dollars, a financial dispute. Let's just say that because I don't want to misstate anything, and that she launched this as a revenge plan. There are much better ways to get revenge for a couple $1,000s. How about going to court? That would have to be partnered with some type of exterior and ulterior motive, maybe vilifying people in the court of public opinion, trying to send somebody to jail for the rest of their life. It depends on how emotionally sadistic they are. And Jerome says, the more important in a murder case is the chain of custody. In this case, it's a mess from day one. Well, Jerome, I think that the majority of the high-profile cases that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio are in that category. Most notably, the Zodiac Killer. Double most notably, D.B. Cooper, where they're just, in both of these cases, the Zodiac and D.B. Cooper, you have investigators, FBI agents, and Joe Schmoes on the ground who are just saying, all right, this is the evidence. The evidence is right here. Well, we're just not going to keep the evidence, or we're not going to store the evidence. We're not going to handle the evidence properly. Why should the JonBenet Ramsey case be any different? Now, as I said, the only one that has an excuse is Jack the Ripper. I talk about the Zodiac every Monday, Jack the Ripper on Wednesday, and D.B. Cooper on Fridays. Jack the Ripper was 137 years ago. Something's about to be lost. The Zodiac and DB Cooper and JonBenet Ramsey, no. They just didn't handle the evidence. They didn't store it properly. They didn't keep it safe. They didn't keep it away from contaminants. That's the answer to all of these things. Captain Jenks says, Patsy wrote her a check and she didn't give her cash. That's to the housekeeper. And I guess I can say her name. I doubt she's watching this live stream. Linda Hoffman Pugh. And her husband was named Mervyn Pugh. And she's the one who comes into question here. And some people really think that those two were responsible. And then for a while, I guess I can tell you as well, she was my suspect. But I just don't know if I can say that with conviction now. Dan Russo says, go back to his payroll person at his company. Now, Dan, it's my understanding that they did do something like that, where they went through the employees at Access Graphics, because they're like, the employees with John Ramsey could have known about the bonus, and I guess they just didn't find anything, but sometimes people can slip through the cracks. Patrick says, false confessions would be a great subject for BBO War. Every case that you cover has people coming out of the woodwork to confess. Then there's Black Dahlia, 500 confessions to a gas chamber crime. All right, now, Patrick, at the beginning of this episode, I talked about some of the reasons why people would confess to crimes that they didn't commit, even murder. You brought up the gas chamber. Another reason would be, someone wants to take credit for a murder that they didn't commit. They want to die. They don't want to live in the outside world anymore. They're not like the Zodiac. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber. They're like a step above that. Bring it on. Send me to the gas chamber. Electric chair. Lethal injection. Or maybe like Brian Koberger will experience next year, the firing squad. They still do that in Idaho. Sorry, Brian. But Captain Jenks says, if that note was not a ruse, someone waited for a long time in that house hidden in the wine cellar. Yes, of course. Of course. And this is another disgusting thing that I've learned in the true crime world. People will do that. Predators will do that. It was reported that the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo, would hide in the bushes for like 4 hours, sitting there doing nothing. This is before cell phones and internet and data plans and all that. Sitting in the bushes, doing nothing, waiting for a family to come home to terrorize them. So would somebody do that to attack JonBenet? Absolutely. Some type of predator? I think that people operate in that way. And Patrick says, join late. No worries, no worries. You can get this true crime on the phone from the beginning during the replay. And then, once again, everybody who's just joining right now, next week on Tuesday and Thursday, there will be a return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I hope that everything will be working more functionally, because this really threw me off. The computer didn't work, which is the second time that that's happened this year. That never happened before. So I'm hoping I'll figure out what's going on. And in addition to that, you can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, drop a comment down below if you have anything to say about the true crime cases that I talk about on BBO War, the case of JonBenet Ramsey, the Zodiac Killer, DB Cooper, and Jack the Ripper. And this Thursday, I will be playing the continuation of the interview that I did with Sonnet Daymont. Sonnet is a psychotherapist, and we had the opportunity to talk about the Zodiac Killer last Monday, and we've talked about some other true crime cases, and it's going to be done purely in the True Crime Talk Radio format, where we're going to be discussing multiple subjects, and not even the unsolved mysteries, but the true crime cases that Sonnet actually has some personal connections to. And I mean, this is some new territory for the channel. I wasn't even familiar with these stories until I discussed them with her. So I'll play the next clip in the interview, and then we'll talk about, my responses. And Chickadee says, please give Ned a like. He works really hard on his channel. Chickadee, you get a like just for saying that. And I was listening to Ryan Burns over on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel when he's just talking about how can the channel get X amount of views but only Y amount of likes? He didn't say that, but that's what he means. So it almost seems like loads of people are watching the channel, and I get a lot of feedback from people, but some people just aren't hitting that like button. If you are curious about anything that I'm saying, please hit the like button. And even you, that lizard person who was here at the beginning, was talking about lizards and squirrels, if you're still watching, please hit the like button. Then never listen to my channel again, because you said some really, really unpleasant stuff, and I've already blocked you. But if you're still listening, feel free to hit the like button or do something else and stay constructive with your life. But right now, I would also like to ask everybody if they have any theories about JonBenet Ramsey. And I would say that my biggest takeaways from this series, The Imperfect Murder, that I did was I actually found that the parents do look a little bit more guilty than I thought in the past. Some of my earliest kind of responses that I had to the parents and the way that they were acting is I just thought they were unfairly vilified in the court of public opinion. I thought that all the focus was coming on them when it should be on an intruder. I thought that they were looking at them inappropriately because they didn't like Patsy's behavior. They didn't like Burke's behavior, the son. But even though after doing this series, The Imperfect Murder, John Ramsey, the father, looks way more guilty for a lot of the reasons that I said in the episodes that I've talked about. But, as I was just saying here in the live stream, I'm still not convinced that he did it. And I still wouldn't even say that he is my top suspect. I've been pretty clear. My top suspect is some type of unknown or unnamed intruder. But with John Mark Karr, he's kind of down here. And it seems like he's been not heavily cleared, but maybe about 70% cleared. Who knows about the DNA? Gary Oliva is still higher in my book, and some of the suspicions that I had about him and that he was just bullshitting and making this stuff up is he makes the confession on December 27th of 1996, but he just says, I heard a girl. He didn't say a name. He's confessing to a friend. Well, even though the timing matches up, I have to be like, I'm not convinced that that's related to JonBenet. And I have a whole episode about Gary Oliva's suspect. And I would also like to say thank you to everyone who has been following along with these live streams, episodes, the shorts that I do Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and, of course, Zodiac Monday. All of you are amazing. Captain Jenks says, I think it was an outsider that knew John Ramsey. Yes, I do too. Captain Jenks says, today's technology, 2025, and no retesting of evidence. I don't know. I don't know, Captain Jenks. John Ramsey also doesn't know that. And I want to be clear. Even though my suspicion level went from 0 to maybe 15 on him, he's still not my suspect. But as of now, I would like to say this live stream's coming to an end. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow to talk about the case of Jack the Ripper. Ripper Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio. Everybody have a wonderful day. Snoopy and I are going to go hang out for a second. And by the way, I'm back on coffee for one night only. I've been drinking tea for the last 2 weeks, but now I'm back on coffee. Jerome says, thank you, Ned. Have a good day, Jerome. And everybody, take care.